We are back with Matt Wyatt, like Herb, and his film StuFt. He was nominated by Eric Toms, and here we go. So, Matt, prior to me, diving into our three questions that we have for you, is there anything that you wanted to share about yourself or the film or anything?
Sure, yeah. So my background, I grew up in Southern California. I went to USC Film School, and
Ooh,
then kind of been out here, just trying to do it for a while. I do kind of a mixed bag of like commercials and documentaries and narrative stuff. And StuFt came out of my buddy David Kearns and I are huge puppet fans. I'm a big, I loved the Muppets growing up. And David's actually a puppeteer. And so we were just talking about trying to do something with puppets because we love puppets. So that's kind of how the initial origins of the idea came about.
cool. Well, it's really interesting. It's going to be interesting to get your take on it because you are in an elite class in terms of being growing up close to the center of, um, you know, there's really a few places where the film industry isn't as big as people think it. From
Sure.
a theatrical distribution perspective, it's like in the 12 to 13, maybe $14 billion range, which is not that high. And I
No,
think
not compared to like video games,
no, video games are like industries like pharma or health or anything
for
else. And
sure.
I think it's so really people don't know that because people don't. I think a lot of people overlook the fact that because of that, that's why it's so hard to get a job in the industry. Partly because there's just not jobs to be had because the industry is as glamorous as it is and as big as it is socially in terms of impact. Well, I guess impact too, but also the people hear about these theatrically distributed films and the movie stars and directors. So there's a lot of marketing buzz around it, but the industry is actually doesn't live up to that kind of colossal standard that's set by the
No, and
market.
it's pretty localized too. There's only really a few cities. I mean, there's lots of cities where you could kind of, you could maybe make a living doing kind of piecemeal film stuff and then make independent projects for sure. But there's only a few cities where you're kind of connected to those centers of production.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's why, your take on it and growing up very close to that center and then really going to one of the most prestigious film schools in the country is going to be interesting. Um, so, our little show tries to do a few things different. We're not really interested about the festival side of things or about trying to make it in the business side of things. I mean, I do point these things out, that we just discussed in terms of like, hey guys, here's what's really going on. But our focus is really on the artistic side of things. And,
Cool.
I was going to start out by asking you, hey, is it really like, beloved turtleneck and applesauce spilled all over it? But I've seen guys actually doing stuff with puppets, and I mean that somatically before. And I'm just like, oh, is there like a genre of like subculture of like dudes and puppets? But that said, you guys, did in terms of visually and technically, really well produced piece. Not,
Oh, thanks, man.
yeah, I mean, not easy to pull off.
No, it's definitely, it's like that was I mean, we kind of knew this going into it working with puppets, but we just like put it in the back of our heads, which is, production's its own kind of special nightmare.
Oh
A
yeah,
friend of mine likes to say that filmmaking is against God because you're trying to control the universe and the universe doesn't like that. So when you add puppets to that, it adds another element because first of all, a human actor is a full-bodied person that you can pretty much shoot from any angle. A puppet, unless you're working with like a fully costumed puppet, that's not the case. Like you're working with, the top, and then you have to A, be careful where you shoot it, and B, avoid your puppeteers. So if you're doing your job right, no one's thinking about the fact that there's a very uncomfortable human like sandwiched under a
yeah,
table
yeah, yeah, yeah,
somewhere. And
yeah.
then I think, even more to the point, kind of, artistically is that there's only a certain handful of like ways that you can shoot puppets to make them appear lifelike, and it's pretty incredible. So when we're shooting, we talk about eyeline, and generally speaking, if I'm lining up a shot with a human actor, I can kind of put the camera in a lot of different places, and it'll still read as a human being, because that's what it is.
Well, and they can move their eyes too to
And they
match
can
that.
move their eyes, exactly. And so puppets, there's really kind of like a sweet spot that is millimeters wide in terms of, we would be on set, and so if this is my camera and this is my puppet, two things are happening. One, all the puppeteer can see is the monitor. The puppeteer obviously can't see through those eyes, so you're kind of like walking the puppeteer, like, okay, go left, go stop,
right,
go
right.
and then
that's funny, man.
When it happens, all of a sudden it just clicks, and you realize,
Sure.
oh, okay, now this hunk of felt seems alive, and you realize, whoa, okay, that's the eye line. And it's pretty, it gives me, obviously I had a ton of respect already for the Muppets team and puppeteers, but to produce like entire television shows and feature films with those kind of challenges is just extraordinary. It's incredible, and it's so amazing, because I was on the set of one of the Muppet movies, and one of the puppeteers came out to talk to us. And so he's a human man, and he's wearing his puppet on his hand. And I can see a human man standing next to me, but all of us were just drawn to the puppet, because there's something that's so magically alive about it. And
it's a real art.
That's what I love about it. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, man, before we should dive into our questions, but before we do, I think a couple interesting things that you say there. Well, actually, to comment on what is interesting that you say, I mean, and can be kind of transferable to the human world. I mean, since the puppet eyeline is non-moving, there is kind of that key area of opportunity that you're can confine to until they look like a dead inanimate shape, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that would probably work with humans as well if they're not moving their eyeline. If they're just a stuck eyeline, right?
For sure.
A certain angle that kind of dead in your character.
Absolutely. And you really start to see, like when you're setting up coverage, like subtle shifts from on this plane in terms of where you're putting a camera, like, can really change how an audience is perceiving a character. And and that's why when you have certain filmmakers that are really playing with, we always say, like, to have a character like actually burn the lens, by which I mean like look down the barrel, the middle of the lens, that's actually very rare. That almost never happens in a movie, because that's a very aggressive thing to do, because now your characters are looking at the audience, which breaks what we call the fourth wall, because now the audience is seen, and so the audience is like, I'm being looked at.
Right.
But there's a lot of filmmakers that play with having characters look just barely off of that middle sight line, and that can be extraordinarily powerful, because it's kind of like if you were sitting with someone at a coffee shop and they were like not quite looking at you, but still giving the impression of looking at you. So it's still like very intimate, but it doesn't have that one extra sort of aggressive step of the audience feeling like, this character is aware of me. But like when you look at, some of the close-ups in like Silence of the Lambs, like the Hannibal Lecter character is looking just off, and it feels very close to him looking right at us. And so in that case, like, that's very effective, because the audience is very like uncomfortable with that.
Have you seen Michael Caine do? I believe it's Michael Caine, the British actor.
Yeah.
Have you seen him lecture? He does this great.
I've seen some of those things, I think. Yeah.
Oh man, he's amazing with in terms of camera and presence.
Yeah.
But all right, man. Well, let's dive into the three questions, and they're really, again, based on the art and thematic content that you got going on, and technically as well. It's there's going to be some stuff that comes up that's around the art of filmmaking.
Yeah.
So so the first question is, why this film? And before I just totally allow you to answer that as you'd like, I just want to kind of preface it with, like, I was talking to a group of guys that work with me on our team, and I was talking about your film today, and they saw it, and one of the guys was like, it's a real social commentary on dating today. And I was like, yeah, I've been married for a while, so it's like, I that kind of flew right over my head maybe because of that reason. But I was like, oh yeah, that's what it is, And so, so it's not just a goofy movie about puppets, right? So what, if that's the theme, can you elaborate on the theme and then kind of go into what you're feeling, what's going on, and what you want this movie to express?
Yeah, no, I think you have hit it on the head, which was when David and I sat down to write this thing, I think both of us were kind of in the thick with online dating, which is funny because subsequently I am still dabbling in online dating. David has since gotten married, like almost immediately after we wrote that thing. David, the co-writer,
That bastard.
He met an amazing woman, and they quickly got engaged and got married. So I think
the online dating, or
no, they met in real life, which is that seems to be what happens. But yeah, it kind of came out of that, which was, I think, when we were spitballing ideas, we started, like, both of us, obviously it was in the back of our minds, and I think both of us were just thinking about this idea of, I mean, it's literally, some of the lines are verbatim from our experience, which is the frustrations of going through the motions of online dating, not meeting anyone that you're excited about. And so I think that's, the character in the short kind of reaches his limit and decides that, why not? Might as well give puppets a try. And then, at the end of the day, we wanted it to be about this idea of, everyone is searching for a real connection. And we kind of stole a page from When Harry Met Sally, where there's the switch that happens where they go out on a date, and the double date and the two couples end up going for the opposite.
Oh yeah, is that what it's from? Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of like, that's basically that setup. So, at the end of the day, it was important to me that connection that they have at the very end feel extraordinarily real. And that, to me, is the thing that I am most proud of with this short, is that I think there is, you get that real connection between David and the puppet
at the end. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
it's really cute. Yeah,
that's what we're all. That is the purpose of dating. The ultimate purpose is to connect with someone, and I think, I mean, this is maybe a bit of a thematic leap, but I think the idea is that, you don't know where those connections are going to come from. And so I think, like, what I hope people take away from it is that it is a surprising connection at the end. You have these kind of, like, silly, ridiculous puppets, but then there is that kind of humanity in that connection.
That's very cool. What it reminds me of, I've been jamming Eckhart Tolle. Have you heard of him?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, on YouTube, there's some good talks. And so he talks about, it's actually a talk with him and Ram Dass.
Cool.
Yeah, you know him too?
Yeah.
Yeah. I recently got turned on him, man. He's just ridiculous. But so I've been listening to those guys, and Eckhart talks about like no, actually it's Ram Dass. Ram Dass talks about, like, us walking around with these, like, mental constructs, and we're kind of all bumping into one another, and we all have these, like, mental constructs of who we are and how we want to present ourselves, and the mental construct of who we want to find, and all those constructs make it really complicated, right?
Yeah.
To get down, like, hey, I'm just like this, perishable human being, and
sure,
and like, how can we just connect?
Yeah.
So that's, like, I kind of like to deflate this whole, like, why is it so difficult? I mean, that seems like that kind of where the trouble lies. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, it's funny you say that. I was just listening to Noah Levine, who's we have a thing out here called Against the Stream, which is, for lack of a better word, I'm sure they would express it more articulately, but I call it Buddhism for cool tattooed people. There's
Okay. No, I totally get that. Yeah,
people. I'm always like the most kind of lamest normcore looking guy there, but
yeah, you look like you just came out of the forest, dude.
Yeah, Noah Levine is kind of this brilliant Buddhist teacher, and he was talking about that idea of, yeah, like the system of dating, especially online dating, is not really set up to engender meaningful connections, right? Because it's set up more like a job interview, and we're going into it with all of these, you know, barriers and preconceived notions and all this stuff. And at the end of the day, like, yeah, to really connect with another human being, you have to let yourself be vulnerable. And that's, you know, something that's extraordinarily difficult across the board these days, right? That is, it really seems like we crave vulnerability and connection, and we seek that in ways that are not very effective a lot of times at actually fostering that.
Yeah, I mean, namely, you know, oftentimes, you know, it's for young people, drugs and alcohol, partying, and trying to, you know, do that thing. Ridiculously enough, not to advocate that, but that is, I met my wife in a bar, man. We celebrated
Sure. Yeah.
10 years, but I never expected it.
Yeah.
I got lucky, very lucky. But,
Absolutely.
but yeah, man, and our culture certainly doesn't like promote vulnerability. So, you know, that's what we're trying to shoot for here on the show, and I appreciate you, you know, sharing that with us.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so last question, because I think you nailed the what and the why of this, and
Cool.
yeah, and last question is like, what did you learn and how are you changed?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think one thing I learned, which I kind of already knew, but it's interesting. You know this, but you learn it on every project. You relearn it, which is to make something, to make anything. And this could be a film, it could be a table, it could be chicken parmesan. To make anything and to really make it requires so much more focus and energy and commitment than you really think about when you set out to do it, right? You like, there's
It's harder than it looks.
It's always harder than it looks, and to complete something requires a tenacity and a flexibility and a
Flexibility's huge.
yeah, you know, and it's funny because it's something I know from, you know, having made many videos at this point, but it just really, every project is different. And, you know, it happened with this project at a bunch of places. So we lost a bunch of DPs because we had DPs that couldn't take the project. Then ultimately we wound up with a fantastic DP. That's what happens. Our first location, we were shooting at a restaurant, and the restaurant contact showed up about 3 hours late. So by the time we could get in, we've lost 3 hours of our day, you know. And then the place where a lot of people's shorts, I think, kind of start to languish is post too, because in like when you're shooting something, you're like, all right, today's the day we're shooting it, we're gonna shoot it. But then you get into post, and it's easy for things to kind of just, you know, sit there and go. Like, you have to keep dedicating yourself to it. And I think, you know, I see that, and I think also the older I get, the more I start to see that the things I have to kind of know why I'm putting energy into something, right? Where it's, if it's going to be this hard to produce a 5-minute short, you know, like, and or to write a screenplay, to, you know, to do any of these things, it requires that emotional investment. And that you know, everybody who makes anything, you have to keep coming back to that, because there will be times when you're, you know, slogging through something, and there's no real connection between that original fun idea of making this short about puppets, and, you know, now we're stuck out on the street on Fairfax in Los Angeles, like waiting for somebody to show up, and the whole crew's out there. You know, it's like, that's the thing, is it's, you know, it's kind of a cliche, but I do think it is kind of it's a really powerful thing to make something and to commit to making something, and to that end. And this is the other thing, I think you learn from every project too, is, films are intensely collaborative mediums, and there are so many people that contribute so many things to a project, and to that end, obviously, David, the idea came from David and I, but then, along the way, there were so many people who contributed things. Sarah, our amazing production designer, my business partner, Adam Kurland at our production company, he was instrumental in giving us, cool ideas of where we could take this. Like, once we got into post, like figuring out, okay, what is the shape of this thing actually? And, I think that's the other thing too, is trying to be able to, obviously, like you have to keep in mind that initial sort of feeling or spark that you had when you wanted to make something, but then also being open to, can other people help you take it to that place, which is, that's something I am, still continuing to work on, is being open to other people's, ideas and ideas that might seem initially like kind of left field, or like, oh, that seems kind of crazy to me, but like, oh, interesting, like maybe that could be cool. And I think that to me is like really, I think, like, to kind of circle it back to your question, I think like the thing that I am learning more than anything these days is like to try and really be as open as possible and kind of approach things from this idea of like, I think it's easy once you get to a certain point and you've made a few things, you start to have this like, I know how to do this, like, but then to like, can you break that open and really approach things from a place of that kind of like beginner mentality?
Beginner's mind, man.
Yeah, which is hard to do, right? Like that requires a certain degree of humility, but I do think like amazing things can come out of that if you are at least trying to be open to that. So I'm trying to do that more and more these days.
Agreed. I think that's a great point, and I think it's a great lesson for all of us on and off the set, and creative or not. And, to circle back what you said earlier about the theme and the vulnerability of it, stepping to be open, to be vulnerable is to be receptive. That's kind of what it is, right?
Yeah.
You're receptive. So it's a two-way street that you want to keep open for all purposes. And, our challenge is, well, how do we keep ourselves safe? But,
yeah,
as we mature, I think we learn how to do that and keep reminding ourselves that key to new experiences and richer ones is to be open.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Cool. Well, thanks, Matt. I mean, Matt,
Yeah.
do you, I'm sorry I'm a little late.
Oh, no worries, man.
Really, like, flaked. But do you have like 5 more minutes? Because I want to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Because, I'm curious, what do you think about this? One of the things that we're doing now, Digipops, I don't know how much you know, but it's basically.
Not much.
Right. It's basically, who's sponsoring this show, and we're the same people, and we're creating the show to promote Digipops. And Digipops is a forthcoming online film festival where the filmmakers decide who wins.
Okay.
So, going through a fair, merit-based system of voting, where we take all the engagement across multiple parameters, and we fairly curate the content in a way that cumulative advantage, so the currently leaders don't drive more higher views. So it's all like, it's totally fair. I mean, it's pretty incredible in terms of that, and we're very excited about it. We've launched an alpha. We're working on the public beta now, so hopefully coming to you soon, and we'll keep it posted.
Cool.
I say all that because we believe that there can be a new type of filmmaking to emerge. And here's essentially what it is. And interestingly enough, I personally feel that it's going to kind of like trends and cycles do go back to the beginning, where cinema came from short films. And I think the renaissance of short films that can be made, and I usually don't talk about this, I'm talking about it with you, is because you talked about, you guys made a 5-minute short, and it was about 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was, brutal to make. It had multiple locations. The production value is super high. I mean, it's painful, right? And
Sure.
the budgets, when you're doing basically kind of feature, you're scripting, you're right.
Right.
5 minutes of a feature film,
Yeah.
So, but I've made a few little movies that aren't like that, and they're different in this way. I focus on like creating a scripted narrative around a documentary event.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I script this real life thing as a narrative, and it's either about a drama or something going on in my life. The narrative is built in, and or it could be around somebody else's life. Your characters are real, right? You don't have to hire actors,
right?
And you're maybe you and a buddy, or you can shoot it yourself. And now, like the camera and and I taught myself how to edit. I taught myself how to pick up a camera.
Yeah.
So I'm approaching it as a writer, directory guy who I could, pick up camera and edit this whole thing. So I'm responsible for the vision, and it's very low to no cost. And, I can produce this thing in visual quality because of, the technology today, unprecedented is. So I don't know if that film people talk about Dogma, this and that, 95, and, whatever. I don't know if anything's been done or is being done quite like that, but I think there's a real opportunity to create a renaissance, especially if you have a platform that's kind of curating that content in a fair, systematic way. I mean, it doesn't obviously need to be like that, but it's an approachable way of filmmaking where like you said, the kernel of the vision and the amount of energy that goes into it is, sustainable.
Right. Say that again.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, because I think, at the end of the day, I think, especially in short form, I think short form is probably more about story than almost any other medium, right? Like short form is, because you go see a giant feature film, there's some padding there, right? Where if you go see a Star Wars movie or a Marvel movie or whatever, like if there's some parts of it where you're like, I don't really know what was happening there in the narrative, or I don't know why we were watching that, like you got other stuff that's kind of distracting. It's a gigantic spectacle, and it's extraordinarily well done, and and there's all kinds of things happening. Excuse me. With shorts, there are some shorts that are just like kind of one incredible visual conceit well executed, but I think there's a lot of shorts where it lives primarily in the narrative conceit, or in being invested in a story, being invested in a character very quickly. And I think to me, like, I always encourage people to really focus on and bake the the story of what they were doing or what they want to tell first, because I think like you can give yourself some visual latitude or stylistic latitude if the story and if these characters that we're invested in are so compelling. I mean, it's it's an idea that goes back to theater, really. It's this idea of I don't know who said it, but there's this idea of the cat on stage, right? So if you're producing a play, you want your play to be more interesting than if a cat wandered onto the stage. And that's this idea that like a cat is real and dynamic, and no one knows what a cat is going to do. And to that end, that's what you want from stories, right? You want this idea that you are so invested. And you mentioned, like some Dogma films. There's Dogma films where it's not very much except like some characters in a room, but it is so electric and so compelling that you are invested, because at the end of the day, like that's what this is you want I love to see a short, a film, a play, whatever, where I am hanging on to that electricity because I really don't know where this is going narratively, or if I have a sense, I'm like still deeply invested in something. And I think that like you can achieve that in the way that you're talking about. Absolutely.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that take and analysis. I've never heard cat on a stage. When you said it, it's I first thought, oh well, a cat could be really interesting on stage, and that's what you meant.
Yeah.
And so, it led me to think that, hey, that's really a brilliant comment, because it's like, well, if a cat's interesting on stage, being a cat, then how interesting would a human be on stage, just being human?
Yeah, and that's the like, it's one of those little like, there's so many of those little phrases, but it's one that I always think about, which is, yeah, like that's, and I think that's the other thing with filmmaking in general is, like we were talking about before, it's by its nature, it has to be, there's a lot of things that have to be very controlled to make it happen. And so I think the trick is to create a controlled environment that doesn't feel controlled, right? Like that's the ultimate success is something that is, incredibly curated, but doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, and at the same time, open. Yeah, Matt, thank you so much. Really, a lot of great stuff. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks for being on the show, man. And
for sure, good talking with you.
Good talking to you too. All right, Matt. Take care. Have a great day, man.
You too, man.
Bye-bye. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in this week. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and leave us a like and or comment. It makes a big difference. Play It Forward is brought to you by Digipops, where we're building a community to put film and filmmaker discovery in your hands. Here, filmmakers and fans, the creative class, recognizes each other fairly and transparently through a community-curated film festival each quarter. It's coming soon. Thank you.